Well, Jared, thanks for being on the show today. I don't know that you know this, but I introduced you or talked to people about you as my favorite pastor in North Raleigh,
No way.
and that's significant because you're in Raleigh, New City's in North Raleigh, which means you're
Mhm.
like better than me. So
Wow.
you're the pastor of Vintage North in North Raleigh, the best pastor in North Raleigh. And listen, today we're going to talk about rest, parenting, the biblical view of sex, some practical things, some of your thoughts on that. To jump in, and of course now you serve as the pastor of Vintage North here in North Raleigh, but you have a pretty interesting story. So I'd just like to hear just a little bit about kind of your journey to Vintage North and what you've done, especially in your adult life.
Yeah. So adult life, we got married pretty young, 22. My wife and I, my wife's name's Shiloh, and was on a youth ministry path. Served as a youth pastor at a church in Columbus, Ohio for 9 years, and probably would have been there a lot longer. Except God pretty clearly called us to go to China. Um, not the direction that we were heading or preparing for. And so, long story short, we sold everything and moved to China. We made a 4-year commitment to serve there. We worked at an orphanage with kids that were older, kids like age 6 to 18. So it was still pretty intense youth ministry, but also working with a lot of the staff and helping to develop and equip them to implement sort of a spiritual education program with the kids. And so had a pretty finite, like, we don't want to do this forever. We want to
Hmm.
equip the locals to do it. So did that for 4 years, and it was horrible, and it was wonderful, and everything in between. Um, and so then when we moved back, we moved back to we didn't move back. We're not from Raleigh. My wife's from Virginia. I'm from out west, but we spent some time in Ohio, and so we moved to Raleigh because my parents had moved pretty close to here to do international student ministry. So there's a very large number of international students, and here in the Triangle, there's a lot, and they all come from, not all, but the majority of them come from um, places where the gospel's hard to get to. Um, the like if you take a map of like unreached people in the world, and you take a map of international students who are studying in the States, and you line them up, they line up
Oh, wow.
pretty closely. And they're the best, the brightest. They speak English, so it's almost like this from a Bible standpoint. It's almost like this reverse Pentecost, where instead of like the
Mhm.
apostles learning all these supernaturally learning these other languages to be able to communicate, like everyone's
Yeah.
coming here and they speak our language and they're paying their own way, and then sending them back as those that became believers, sending them back to be like no visa required, already know the culture,
Mhm.
um, sort of missionaries to their own countries. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then in doing that, we were a part of a church, and 2.5 years in, it was a church plant and it closed, and it was really, really difficult. A friend of mine
Mhm.
was the pastor. We were on staff, just kind of serving, and and 2.5 years in, it closed, and we were devastated. So for the first time in my life, we were church shopping, which church shopping is horrible. And so we ended up at Vintage, and we thought, oh, this is a really good church. We like it, but they also could use a lot of help. It wasn't
Mhm.
perfect. It wasn't huge. It wasn't, they had everything figured out, and we really wanted to be involved. And so started going to Vintage, and then was a year later was going through the eldership process, and that kind of turned into being hired as associate pastor, um, and then our pastor stepped down. What was going to, we didn't know COVID was coming, but it ended up being
Yeah.
right about the time that COVID came. We were actually going to use your church for a members' night to announce it, and
Yeah.
then um, and then that meeting was scheduled for March 17th of 2020, and that meeting
Yeah, it
never
didn't happen.
happened. So we
Yeah.
sat on it for a while, and then announced it, and yeah, that was 5 years ago, and here we are.
Yeah. Here you are. Now, I want to talk about kind of Sabbath, rest, slowness. To give some context to this conversation, how old are you, Jared?
I'm 47.
47. You have four kids. What's the age ranges?
Yeah. Uh, 21, 19, 14, and 12. So two in college, two in middle school.
So regardless of, job vocation, obviously
Hmm.
the Bible talks about Sabbath and what does that look like. You're not going to hear from someone who's like 25, single with no kids.
Right.
Someone who's like been through it, had 4 kids, lots of different jobs. So I will just kind of start with there. What does Sabbath to you look like? I mean, how do you explain it? Why
Mhm.
is it important? Why is it like like a passion point for you?
Yeah. Uh, Man, yeah, it could be a long conversation. So you mentioned age. I want to say this as a starting point. Sabbath is going to look very different for different people in different seasons. If you're a mom and you have a toddler at home, you can't do what I do, which is
Mm,
what I do is Friday's my day off, and I do nothing I don't want to do.
right.
I stop. I don't work. Um, I I go on mountain bike rides. I build stuff in my garage. Um, I read books. I drink too much coffee. I sleep in. You know, I take so I don't. I'm pastor, so it doesn't work for me on Sunday. I
Right.
do feel like Sunday is a great worshipful day with my church, but it's work. It's not
Hmm.
restful. Um, and so I take Friday. My kids are in school. My wife works also at the school, so it's just me and the Lord, and stopping and just delighting in Him. Uh, and so if you're a mom of a toddler, and maybe your husband works, you can't do what I do
Hmm.
for Sabbath. So you're gonna have to figure out something that works for you, but you're gonna have to figure out something that is your ability to turn off. And maybe, maybe for you, it is Sunday, and your husband takes all the responsibility on Sunday, or maybe you guys do it together and try and enjoy it, or so you're gonna have to figure out what it looks like for you in your season of life. My season of
Yeah.
life is different. I don't change diapers. I don't have kids
Right.
that are very needy. So, uh, so that works for me, but that's not always been my rhythm.
Yeah. I was curious when did like Sabbath and rest become a big priority for you?
Yeah.
You know.
A lot of it was under the influence of our former pastor. Um,
Mm,
he had a real passion for it. Some of the and this was a while ago. It was probably I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. And doing pastoral ministry is hard, but whatever job you do is hard as well. If you're
right.
listening to this. So I don't want to elevate our job as more difficult than others, although in a
Hmm.
lot of ways it is. But then kind of going through this season of spending time in China cross culturally, their culture is very different, and there's a lot of things that they do that are obviously much more communal. There's a lot of things that
Hmm.
they do that are just much slower and
Yeah.
simpler. And for our lives, when we lived in China, we worked in an orphanage, and uh, it was a different pace, and our kids were young, and our third was born in China, and we just had this, wow, our lives are simple.
Hmm.
And we think about all the other people that we know, our friends in the States, and we're like, it's just, and even our lives before we moved to China, and life just was really simple. And so we made this really conscious decision when we moved back to the States that we weren't going to get wrapped up into the everything, doing all the everything. When we moved back, our kids were what, nine, 7, and 2 ish, and so we didn't do travel sports, and we didn't
Hmm.
do our kids did one thing at a time. One kid would they'd play rec soccer, and they weren't also doing gymnastics, and they weren't also doing guitar
Yeah.
lessons. They weren't also doing they're going to do one thing. And that was only 2 seasons a year, and then 2 seasons a year we didn't do anything. And it was just really nice to kind of hibernate in the winter, and then not having responsibility really in the
So
summer.
I want to talk about this for a second.
Yeah.
The kids thing, real quick, funny story. We've kind of adopted the same philosophy with our kids. They can do one thing at a time, and that's it.
Hmm.
We've got 2 kids. Our daughter's about to turn 10. Our son Roman is 7. Our daughter doesn't care about sports at all, so she does like acting like twice a year. She does these plays in Raleigh,
Hmm.
which is great. And my son loves all things sports, and so he does soccer right now. And he's doing rec, and he's at the age like, we're about to turn 7 in the fall. They can do the in Raleigh. There's what's called NCFC, and his team, his rec team's really good. And so the coach's his son. This is our last season together because the coach's son's going to try out for juniors, is what it's called. And like a couple weeks ago, the coach's wife comes to talk to Christina and I, and like she's like, Roman should try out for juniors. Like he's really good. And she starts explaining what it is. It's two nights a week, and it's like a 30-minute drive from where we live. A bunch of games, a lot of them on Sundays. So it was pretty easy for me to be like, yeah, we're not going to do that because I'm not driving. When he's older, maybe it's different, but he's 7. I'm not driving 2 nights a week, especially on top of ministry stuff. And because our thing is like, you can play multiple sports. So you can do soccer, and then you can play basketball. And like, in the conversation, she talks about, we believe in multiple sports, with our kids too. And so their version, and this is not knock on them, obviously they're different philosophy than us. Their version of multiple sports is soccer and baseball at the same time. And in the fall, it's soccer and basketball at the same time on top of all these practices. Yeah. And, but you feel it, like, especially Christina, she's like, oh my goodness, when she was telling us Roman should try out for soccer, it's like, well, he's supposed to try out for soccer. And so I'm curious, how did you resist that when you first came in? Like, no, one thing at a time at the most.
Well, and here's some background too. And I don't think this is hypocritical. I think so I played Division I soccer myself. And so I did it all. Now, it was 30 years ago, so it's different than it is now. And I loved every bit of it, but we just had this stance of our kids are going to play as long as they can and have as much fun as they can, but we're not going to, I couldn't afford it. I don't have the time for it. We got 4 kids. So like my wife and I at the time, we got 2 driver's licenses. And so how are we going to, it just wasn't even possible. And then forget about the wallet, budget, and being a pastor and working on Sunday mornings. So, and our kids were good. Like even by the time they played for their school team, when they got to middle school and high school. And by the time they graduated, our older 2 kids, like one of them in baseball, one of them in soccer, if we would have invested a lot more, they probably would have been able to play in college. But even still, okay, so 4 more years of whatever, and you're eventually going to become something other than that. Yeah. And so, it was just, it was an emphasis for us. We wanted to be a family more than we wanted to be scattered all over the East Coast going to tournaments. And I'll say this, I hate everything about youth sports culture, almost just about every single thing about it. Our kids go to a smaller Christian school, and the school has a really good perspective on sports, which I like, and I coach there as well. But so that was one of the things that was like, we're gonna simplify, and this is one of the things that we're gonna simplify. And then Sabbath was one of them as well, and academics, and just perspective. I think for us is perspective. I always tell people, and I tell people all the time because I coach soccer, and so I tell parents that are like, we want our kid to get to the next level. And what I tell them is, let's reverse engineer the end game. What's your desired end result? Maybe it's a college scholarship. Okay, you're spending more on soccer than you're getting in a scholarship. I promise you that. But I think it's the same thing with our kids. Like we take this, okay, what do we want from our kids? I don't want my kid to go to Yale. I don't want my kid to play in the English Premier League. I want my kid to love Jesus, and I want my kid to be a servant. That's the end game. That's what I want. I want my kid to be really, really nice to people and love people. So if that's the desired result, let's reverse engineer it, starting with a 7-year-old. Okay, what do I need to do to get there? Not what do I need to do to get my kid on his varsity soccer team. What do I need to get there? And I think that'll change. I think that'll change things. I think that'll change the way that you prioritize church on Sunday morning. I think that'll change the way that you prioritize. For us, dinner time as a family is a really big priority. And there's a lot of things that you can do to get in the way of that. But that's kind of been our approach is, let's reverse engineer from that. And what are the things that we need to do to get there? And what are the things that are going to derail us from getting there?
Yeah. Now you mentioned too, I mean, again, given your age, you had kids, kind of gone through a lot of the stages with them. Obviously you pastor church with a lot of families. What's the kind of the feedback or advice you get when you talk about this? Like your kids don't have to do everything, dinner is important. If you can, do it, taking some time to rest and to slow down. What's like the pushback, or what's the advice you give people that feel like they've got a bunch going on and there's nothing they can do about it?
Yeah, and I'm, at 47, I feel like my wife and I are in our church. We're kind of the old
Mm.
wizened gray hairs, which is a weird position to be in. Like we have two kids in college, um,
Yeah.
and so we tell people all the time. And I used to be much more apologetic and kind of sheepish about it.
Mm.
And probably in my I'm getting like crotchety old man. I know this about myself. I think there's a positive pastoral aspect too, which is I just feel okay telling people like, hey,
Mm.
don't do this. This is dumb. I tell
Yeah.
parents all the time, there are very few like social, political, cultural things from the stage that I'll be really dogmatic about when I preach. But one of them is don't give your kids cell phones.
Mm.
Um, and I'll unapologetically say it. And I know that there are parents out there that I'm talking to
Yeah.
that have given their kids cell phones, and I'm saying in a sermon, don't do that. And I feel like as pastor prophets, we certainly need to speak out against some things, and I think the tyranny of youth sports is one of those. And people know my story. They know that I was a college athlete, um, and they know, but they've also seen the way that we've raised our kids. And so when I say these things, both pastorally and even from the stage, um, I think people get it, and there's still
Yeah.
some families that do it, and they they know my stance, and when they talk to me about it, they're always really like uh, trying to make it sound great, and I'm like, you hate that you had to drive to Charlotte 2.5 hours away on a Sunday afternoon for a 2 o'clock game for a one singular game. You
Mm.
hated that. I know you hated that. Why are you still doing this? And so then inevitably I'll have parents where their kids get to like 14 or 15 and they stop playing travel sports and they'll tell me like, man, our lives are so much better now.
Yeah.
Uh,
I want to talk about this too. So you mentioned something. I want to ask this again,
mhm.
kind of like more of a slow, maybe sustainable rhythm of life. So the no cell phones thing, it's really easy for people to say that when they don't have kids or they have kids that are not of cell phone age, or maybe
Mhm.
they're older and, when they were younger, it was just a different world. But you've got kids that are younger and now in college. So when did you start the cell phones? What was that like for you?
Yeah.
How old are they?
Uh, so we call them the bigs and the littles. We have the two older, the two younger. For our older kids, they both got cell phones when they were 13-ish. And so that was what, 8 years ago when our
Mm.
first kid got one. I now have a 14-year-old and he does not have a cell phone yet. And he's not getting one anytime soon. He has a
Mm.
watch that he can text and call uh, whatever numbers that we put in it. So it's like me and my wife, their brothers, a couple
Yeah.
others. Um, so any parent that gives me well, I need to be able to get in touch with my kids. Number one, you don't. Number two, if you really do, there are other devices that don't have
Yeah.
the World Wide Web on it, that don't have group text, that don't have, and there's
Mm.
there's a million other, and so stuff's so much smarter now than it was
Yeah.
when I first got my kids' iPhones. But my wife and I have talked about this, and we've talked about it with our kids. Um, Man, that was dumb. Why did we
Yeah.
do that? And even
Mm.
still, when they were 13, Keegan was the second to last kid in his class to get a cell phone.
Yeah.
So, uh, so there's kind of this like, well, when he starts driving, well, his watch also has GPS on it, so we can track where he is. So I even still, I'm like, I just I hear parents all the times that do it, and everything about them talking about doing it is they're caving in. Well, I
Mm.
just got my kid, and I don't know how I feel about it yet. Well,
Yeah.
why'd you do it
Yeah.
then? You know it's wrong. Well, there's positives. Okay, but I also promise you the negatives outweigh the positives.
Yeah.
I know what a struggle it is for me as a 47-year-old to have that thing in my pocket all the time. Why would I give my 14-year-old an unlimited pornography dispenser in his pocket?
Mm.
Why would I do that?
Yeah.
So that's my very dogmatic and harsh. And if you already have your kid a cell phone, I'm not going to apologize because
Yeah.
it's a bad idea.
Yeah, man, it's super tough. A lot of the research now we have more and more research. I think Jonathan Haidt, other people talk about being
Hmm.
16. Certainly trying to know social media. We're like real time trying to navigate it. Finley, and we're kind of the same way. Like, yeah, there's no cell phone
But
age
you're not you're not
verification.
there yet, right? Your kids are younger than mine by a good bit.
Yeah. So, but for context, so Finley's in fourth grade, and about half the
Hmm.
kids have phones. Now,
Yeah.
our school is pretty good about you can't have them out during and a lot of states are, I hope North Carolina follows suit, like the no phones during school. Got to drop it off in the morning. Don't get it till the end of the school day.
Hmm.
So it's not too bad in her school right now, but about half of them have cell phones. And so all we do now is that she has we have a Amazon tablet for our kids, and she has, it's like they don't have access to the internet, but they have like games that we've downloaded, and
Hmm.
she has Facebook Messenger for kids, and so she's got
Hmm.
friends that we've approved of, and she knows, hey, at any point we can go through your messages if we want to.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like, and that's like all she's going to get for who knows a long time. But my biggest point of tension is like, man, how do we navigate the? I know all of your other friends have it, but you don't get
Hmm.
it, because
Yeah.
There is this thing of which, like, you don't want your kids to be left out, but also we're not going to do
I don't
something
care
because
about
everyone's
that.
doing it. So
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
and
there
there's
you go.
a teaching point too, which is, as followers of Christ, and I know a lot of their friends who have phones are also followers of Christ. So I'm not making that
Right.
that one-to-one correlation. But as followers of Christ, there's a lot about our lives as a 13-year-old or as a 30-year-old that our desire is going to be to not do what everyone else is doing. And so there's
Yeah.
a real opportunity and teaching moment that, I mean, I tell my kids all the time, like when we're watching a Disney movie, or when we're watching the Super Bowl and commercials come on, or when we're going to someone's house or whatever. I mean, there's so many times where we'll tell our kids like, hey, we serve Jesus,
Mhm.
and we're going to do this different than other people are. And yeah, this Disney movie is, yeah, we like Disney. We're not Disney bashers. We like Disney, but also we need to realize that they don't serve Jesus, and so they've got a different
Mhm.
perspective on life than we do. And so just talking moments through a movie or through commercials or through hanging out with other people, but also it's just another opportunity to have that same conversation, which is we're not going to do this the same as everyone else.
Yeah. That's good. Also, I want you mentioned kind of dinners, family dinners. Again, you've four kids, all the sports, all the things. How have you guys, and how do you guys prioritize it? How many times a week is your goal? What does that look like for you?
Um, we do it when we're here. Now there's some, again, season of life. So
Right.
we don't. Our kids are old enough that they play sports for their school. Well, their school sports practice at 3:15, not 7, not on the other side
Mm.
of town.
Right.
Their games are at 4. Most of their games are at 4. So, uh, you know, games at 4, it's over at 6. Sometimes we'll go out after, because there's not time to cook, so we'll go out. But again, we'll go out as a family. And even when a kid has an event, like we've just always, our kids come to their brother's sporting events,
Mm.
and then we'll go out to dinner together. Now, like our kids go out with their friends, and our kids have stuff, and I have meetings sometimes. So, but probably 5 nights a week,
Mm.
we'll sit down together for dinner as a family. And it's connected. There's a lot. If my kids did travel sports and they'd practice 3 nights a week at the WRAL fields up, 25 minutes away,
Yeah.
um, that would take 3 nights a week away from dinner with the family.
Right.
Um, so that there's quite a few decisions that affect that. The way that my wife works at the school, so that doesn't interfere. I'll have, I don't know. I try not to do more than one work night a week
Mm.
out. And usually when I do work nights, and this is true with a lot of the people in our church that have younger kids, we'll meet at like 7:30 or 8. So we'll do dinner.
Mm.
Um, a lot of people that have younger kids will put their kids in bed, and then we'll meet. Um, I'm better at night than I am in the morning, anyways. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, just some of the decisions that have gone into that.
Yeah, it's really helpful. Any other just thoughts in general about slowness, Sabbath? I know seasons of life is a little bit determinative of this, but if people are just like
Hmm.
practically, they're in their wheel of all the stuff going on, of course, on our screens all the time. Just other advice for slowing down and resting.
Yeah, and there's been a good bit written about this lately. I'm not the pioneer of this, certainly. John Mark Comer's written a bit about it, and his stuff's really
Hmm.
good, about just kind of turning things off, but even just, it's more than just putting your phone down, because I still feel like we don't have the ability to actually resist that temptation. So you got to set up
Yeah.
boundaries in your life.
Hmm.
The way that it was told to me one time, Pete Scazzaro also wrote a good bit about it in his emotionally healthy stuff. Went to a conference up at his church, and Rich, who's the pastor there now at that church, said, um, for example, if as a pastor, if I took the Ten Commandments and if I violated any one of those Ten Commandments, I would lose my job. If I killed somebody, if I cheated on my wife, if I started taking the Lord's name in vain, if I started worshiping other gods, certainly, I would lose my job. And he said, but if I violate the fourth commandment, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. If I violate the fourth commandment, my church will probably grow and I'll probably get a raise. And it was such a stark statement, and it was so obviously, whoa, how have we missed this? Why have we gotten this so backwards? And there, for my whole life, there's been such a separation of, well, but we have Jesus now, so we're not under the law.
Mm.
I agree, and that's a whole longer conversation. However, there's principle in Sabbath that is not just this. It's not the same as, the Old Testament law of, not sewing two different types of fabric together. There's something a lot deeper here, and in fact, we just preached through Exodus, and there's a scene in Exodus where God tells Moses how to build the tabernacle, and then he gets this place where he like summarizes the law, and he says all these things, and then he says, really interestingly, it says, and above all else, keep the Sabbath. And I was like, whoa, that's standing out there, and then you got to ask the question, why? Okay, well, Exodus talks about because God created in 6 days and rested on the seventh. But when you look at the Old Testament law and even look at a lot of what Jesus said, there's this real principle of, you are not here to produce. Your job is not to crush it, kill it, produce as much as you possibly can. When we take that approach, which is like the American dream that'll suck you in if you let it, it does real damage to your soul. And I think that happens on a pastoral level, where it gets sneaky, where it's like, yeah, but I'm doing good stuff. I'm doing like kingdom work, this important stuff.
Mm.
And so because of that, a lot of pastors turn into workaholics and they don't rest.
Yeah.
I was listening to a podcast. I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus, but it was a pastor who's somewhat of a household name, and he works too much. And I'll tell you, he works too much, and his staff works too much. And the way that he was talking about his work, I was like, this is an idol. It felt really icky to me. But I think he's bought into that American dream of like, you are what you produce. And I had this real, I'll call it a gift from the Lord. I was riding my bike on Third Ring Road in Beijing, just crazy traffic, and there were times where the spiritual lostness felt almost tangible. 19 million people in Beijing, vast majority of them don't know the Lord. And so you kind of feel like this, well, I need to do it all. I need to work harder. I need to do more. I need to, but also serving as an expat in a foreign country, doing things is really hard, especially when you don't speak the language and you don't know the culture. And I felt like the Lord said to me at one point, I love you way more than I love what you can do for me. And man, that was a gift of freedom of, okay, I don't need to save 19 million Beijingers. And I also, what the Lord wants is he wants my soul to be in love with him more than anything else. And that's going to lead to, because I love him, working hard for him. That's going to lead to daring and risking and doing and being faithful for him. It's going to lead to a bunch of positive things. But it's unhealthy when it's backwards. Yeah. When you're doing all those things so that the Lord will love your soul, instead of working from that position of a father saying, "You're my son and I love you." Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot more to be said about that, but
Yeah,
We'll
maybe
stop
just
there.
a final question on Sabbath resting. Someone's listening to this. They're working a typical Monday to Friday job. They're
Hmm.
like, so what do I do? Maybe I have kids. I go to church on Sunday. I got to get the housework done or the other
Yeah.
errands. It's like, how do I Sabbath?
Yeah. I mean, you gotta pick a day. And I'd say a day, and I'd say day matters. I don't think which day matters. But let's say it is Sunday for the average person. Um, First of all, to rest on Sabbath is usually going to take some pre-work. So there's some
Mm,
things that I'll do Thursday nights that I don't have to do them on Friday. Uh, maybe you'll do the dishes or uh, mow the lawn or take care of whatever on Saturday so that you don't have to do it on Sunday. Um,
mm,
and pick a day and say, so when Pete Scazzero wrote about it, he said four things, and I'm going to mess them up. Number one, stop. Number two was delight. Number three was worship, and I think there was a fourth one. But anyways, the first thing is to just stop and don't do anything that you have to do. Now, taking care of kids is something that you're going to have to do.
mm.
But be okay with not responding to the emails. Be okay with some dirty dishes in the sink waiting till tomorrow. Be okay with whatever these things are, and then do what you're going to delight in, what God's created you to enjoy, um, and spend time in that day worshiping the Lord for it. And maybe for you that's Sunday, maybe that's church and prioritizing that. Um, but don't mow the grass because tomorrow's Monday and you have to go back to work. And don't just
Mm.
permission to stop doing those things. And that's a really difficult detox for a lot of
Yeah,
people.
yeah.
Uh, and if you're a pastor, take a day off that's not Saturday.
Mm.
Um, and and don't and don't work and do what you enjoy. Do stuff with your kids. Um, Cook really good meals and do it slowly and enjoy them and linger at the table and um, yeah.
Yeah. Speaking about kids, I think it's increasingly parenting. I think is becoming increasingly harder, not just because of like the technological changes, but and especially in the Western individualistic culture. Lots of people are like don't even live near their parents, grandparents, and it's
Yeah.
like where do you
Yeah.
go for help? And of course, online there's a lot of perspectives that I think are less than helpful. But you have, again, you've been through it and you're living it. You got younger kids, now kids in college. I'd just be interested to talk about parenting for a little bit, kind of just like
Hmm.
advice, tips, things you've learned over the years, things that's helpful. I know some of the things you mentioned, like, yeah, I know everyone else is doing it, but that doesn't mean we're going to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about parenting for a little bit.
Yeah. And I think some of these things that we've already talked about kind of go hand in hand with it. Um, and there's obviously been a lot that's been written and talked about culturally where, when we were raised, especially in the summertime, we'd go out on our
Mm.
bikes and we would sometimes be back before dark. Sometimes,
Right.
sometimes we wouldn't. And our parents would sometimes know where we were, but wouldn't always. There was a real freedom. And I think Jonathan Haidt has said this in his book, like, especially compared to like when we were kids, where now there is hyper oversight in the natural world, but very little
Mm.
oversight in the virtual world,
Yeah.
where it needs to be opposite. We need to
Yeah.
be hyper vigilant about what our kids are doing and being exposed to online, on their phones, whatever, and be much more hands off when they're riding their bikes down the street. Um, and that's been a really interesting, and a lot of people, uh, I think most people in our generation, their parenting, think they're not helicopter parents, but are.
Mm. Yeah.
Every
Hmm.
helicopter parent I know says amen to everything that's ever been said about how helicopter parenting is bad. So it's like kind of this,
Right.
it's this interesting perspective. But there's the challenge, of like when your kids are 18, they're going to leave and they're going to do whatever they want. Our kids
Yeah.
are in another state going to college, and they're doing whatever they want to do. And uh, so again, reverse engineering from that. Parenting has to be leading them up to the place where when you send them off, they're prepared instead
Mm.
of, I've never I've never been out of mom's oversight. I've never done anything where she's not told me exactly how to do it. And so how do you prepare your kids to launch, to be, I mean, as adult as they possibly can at 18, and
Right.
not completely fall on their face? And we've seen when they go out, then you're like, oh, probably should have better prepared them for that, or for this, or and we got a whole list of those things, as well. But there's also a good list of things that we're like, oh, we feel really pleased with how this turned out.
Yeah, so can you maybe speak to you a little bit? Coddling of the American mind is one of the big ones by Haidt. I think he
Hmm.
says the anxious generation. And one of the things he talks about is like kids need to go and experience freedom and do things on their own. And part of it, I remember, there's a couple books I've read on this. Part of it is like, a lot of kids now, even in high school, like they won't order something from a restaurant. They won't say anything. And part of it is they were trained when they were 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I can't do anything without mom and dad. They got to say everything.
Hmm.
And then there's just like, they never learned like, it's okay. I don't know if you have like, yeah, I know we're doing some stuff with our kids that intentionally giving them freedom that other people are like, you let your kids do that. In fact,
Yeah.
Christina, my wife, she's like, we shouldn't tell people. And I was like, well, no, we need to tell them that it's
Yeah.
normal. And so what are some things that you would recommend in terms of giving kids freedom and allowing them to do some things so they can learn and grow?
Yeah, I mean, so I have four boys. They're all boys. So there's a lot of boy stuff that happens
Mm.
and has happened at our house. We have a trampoline, and even still, like, I think it gets jumped on every single day. And our kids ride bikes, and there's Taco Bell across the street, and our kids walk and ride their bikes over to Taco Bell. And um, there's just there's a uh, and here's, I think, a good way, and I'm gonna get gender specific here if I can. I'm gonna stereotype. I think the problem with a lot of, like, the super oversighty things is that I think in an ideal situation, God created kids to have a mom and a dad.
Mhm.
And there's a reason for that, and it's intentionally designed, and moms parent different than dads do, or at least
Mhm.
they should. And I think what's
Yeah.
happened in our super safe bubble wrap helicopter parent society is a lot of dads, I'm going to use clean language here. A lot of dads have been, uh, what's the word, emasculated, uh, to parent like moms parent.
Mhm.
And that is not in any way to say anything negative about the way that moms parent, because God
Right.
created moms to parent the way that moms parent, and kids need moms to parent the way that moms parent. But kids also need
Right.
dads to parent. And
Yeah.
so there are times when mom does her thing, and it's nurturing and it's caring and it's safe. And there's times where dad does his thing and needs to tell mom, you're not invited. We're going to go do this thing that would scare the pants off of you, but we're going to go do it. And uh, and if you want to come, that's fine, but we're going to do it, and you need to watch and not tell them to not to.
Yeah.
And so dads need to take kids out and get their knees skinned up, and
Mhm.
dads need to teach them how to use saws that could chop their fingers off, but teach them how to do it correctly,
Yeah.
so that they can get to the point where, okay, hey, I'm going to go build this thing. Okay, go do it because you know how. Whereas if I parented like a mom, like the average mom, it would be like, no, don't, stop. And that's not a bad thing, because kids need that too.
Right.
And so I think, unfortunately, the reason why we have the coddled everything is because I think most kids are being raised by two functional moms.
Yeah.
And that's
Well, I think,
and I don't mean that to be, I
yeah.
don't know, I don't mean that to be sexist or anything. We need moms, but we also need dads, and
Yeah.
they need to operate differently, is what I'm
Yeah.
saying.
I would just say too, I know I mentioned this a couple of times, it's really helpful. So Jonathan Haidt, Coddling American Mind, not a Christian, kind of gives the data behind this,
Hmm. Yeah.
of like men and women are different, and dads help kids take risks. And you talk about boys. I just want people to know I've got a son and a daughter. If you want a self confident daughter, you do dads have to they need their dads to do things
Hmm.
with them, to roughhouse even with them, to give them some freedoms that mom doesn't want. And so again, it's funny for us because Christina's like all in on this, but we're so different. And so we'll do things like we'll let Finley, 9, about to be 10, she can ride around the neighborhood on her bike all by herself wherever she wants to go, and she can
Hmm.
go as long as she wants. And when we first started doing that, she's like, "No, we can't let them do that." Or we've got a playground in our neighborhood. It's not too far from our house, but and so when they were 6 and 8, we started letting them go by themselves. And the first time it's like no. And then what's hard too is like you're nervous that other people are gonna like get
Yeah.
mad. Where's your parents? But it's just like, man, we've got to do it. And if you want self-confident boys and girls, you've got to let them do and do some dangerous things, or quote unquote
Hmm.
dangerous things, right? Obviously in supervision, but it can't be safe. And so I think to your point, like the kind of being raised by two moms, I think part of that is our culture views men as bad and women as good. So masculinity is toxic. If men are trying to lead, that's patriarchy. And so we're just kind of told like men are bad and women are good. And so therefore how dads want to parent are bad and how moms want to parent are good just because
Right.
it's manly and feminine.
Yeah. Well, here's an
So,
example. My wife works at a school, and this year there's a dad and his daughter that ride their bikes to school. She's elementary age, and he rides with her, but she rides her own bike. And my wife said, "You would not believe the backlash that the school has
mm,
received from this situation." And she's like, and my wife, her response, and she's actually the school counselor, so uh, she's able to say this. She'll tell people, "No, your daughter can't ride a bike to school and shouldn't ride a bike to school because she never has and she never will. But his daughter, he's taught her how to do it, and he's taught
mm,
her what to do, what not to do. They've practiced. He's confident, and so she does because why? Because they got to the point and they risked and they tried and they crashed and all those things that you got to do to get to the point where yeah, let's ride our bikes to school.
yeah,
But the onlooking public, and I don't know if anyone's ever said anything to them about it, but they've certainly said a lot of things to school about it, and
yeah,
that's exactly what you're talking about.
yeah. Yeah, it's hard too. So like our bus stop, it's not too far from our house, but you can't see it from our house. And
Hmm.
they'll ride the bus home unless there's like an activity. And at our school, if you are a first grade or kindergarten, you are not allowed to walk home from the bus stop without a parent. And we're talking about we're in a neighborhood
Yeah.
now. Sometimes we've started to do it, and like they let us do it sometimes because at least Roman is in first grade; he's with Finley. But like we will in the morning, they can't stop us. So there are a lot of mornings now for some independence. We let them go by themselves, and it's just kind of funny because some of the other parents in the neighborhood are kind of like they're used to it now because we've just done it. And I
Right.
think some of them secretly are like, oh, I guess we could do it too. But we first started doing it this year, mostly because Roman was younger in kindergarten. I was like, they're not going to let us do it. They were kind of like, where's your parents? And it's like, well,
Hmm.
they need to be by themselves. And
Yeah.
we don't have a phone to check on them. There's a chance they don't get on the school bus. The chance is extremely slim, by the way. And it's fine, but it's like just the culture is like, you can't do anything without supervision. And it's just, I think that's part of the reason why kids are so anxious today. So,
Well, yeah, certainly. There's a connection there. I wish my wife
yeah.
was here. I could pass the mic to her on all the anxiety stuff because she's a school counselor, and so
Yeah.
um, she deals with the anxiety, everything from a kid being anxious about a test to attempted suicide and everything in between.
Mhm.
But yeah, she has a lot to say about it as well.
Yeah. And it's not obviously the phones is a big part of it, but it's also there's just no self confidence that I can do hard things
Hmm.
because we don't let them. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's really good. I want to talk about kind of a biblical view of sex. You got some thoughts on that, but
Okay. So, transition. Nice
but
segue. That was
yeah, it's
good.
just nice hard transition. Before we do that, I mean, you've said some really I think helpful, practically helpful thing, especially I think for women, but also for men listening. Like you can be a man and you can be a dad,
Yeah.
and that's good. And I think one of the things that we've got a lot of young families at New City, and one of the big issues that we run into is mom, especially with their first kid, doesn't let dad be dad with the baby or with the toddler. And then what
Yeah.
happens is you fast forward 5, 10, 15 years, dad has been taught that he's not allowed to do anything his way. It's all
Yeah.
whatever mom wants. And I do
Yeah.
think that's part of the two mom thing is like young moms have to learn, like, I know it's scary, but let dad do it dad's way.
Hmm.
Otherwise, he's never going to be able to do it and you're going to have issues.
Yeah.
So, any other parenting thoughts before we make that hard transition?
Oh man, so many, too many. Um, Yeah, too many, and a lot of it. So model for your kids. Um, I mean, the biggest parenting thought is this: if you want to have resilient kids who feel safe, love your spouse.
Mm.
This the
Yeah.
safest thing you can do. If you want to do safety for your kids, the easiest way to make them feel safe is to love your spouse. The easiest way to make your kids anxious and make them feel unsafe is for them to wonder about the safety
Mm.
of the family. Um, so the biggest thing you can do, love your spouse, love them radically, model that. Another thing that we try and model for our kids is like, well, this is the way that I live, and this is the way that we do. One of the when we were about to move to China, we made a list of positives and negatives, and the positives list was really small. Like God wants us to. That was about it. The negatives list was incredibly long. But one of the things on the positives list was we want to model for our kids, and I don't know if they'll get it right now, but they will eventually, that when we say all that we have is for the Lord and hold
Yeah.
everything open handed, Lord, take it, do what you want with it. Um, we mean it. We don't just say it. And we showed that by, Lord, whatever you want. So we sold everything and moved to this other side of the world. And it was a way to show our kids, to model for them. Um, we're not the the way to follow Jesus is not the way of safety. The way to
Mm.
follow Jesus is not the way of comfort. And you can say that all you want, from your leather sofa, but
Right.
it doesn't make the same impact as when you do it with your lives and you bring them along for the ride. Um, my oldest did his senior thesis in high school on the title was The Wussification of America. So his senior thesis was about a lot of these things, and parents are overscheduling and they're too safe, and I forget what his third point was, um, but like some of the questions are, how did you come to this topic? And he's like, well, uh, this is what, like, we've done hard things. We say all the time,
Mm.
um, like we in our family we do hard things, and it's kind of like this motto that we've told our kids, and when they're afraid to do something, don't want to do it or whatever, like, no, we do hard things.
Yeah. That's helpful. Well, again, speaking of hard things, I think we've shared some maybe not popular, but I think accurate opinions about parenting. The biblical view of sex obviously is not what our culture says, and
Hmm.
you're hateful, you're bigoted, you're all that. You're just a terrible person, especially because sex is the end all be all, and if you attack an idol, people get really angry.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, thoughts on that? How do you gauge that with your culture? I mean, even you can talk about how you engage with your kids because you got kids that are about that age right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, how do you face that topic these days?
um I've I've realized recently, as I've done some preaching on this, as I've done some study on it, as I just officiated weddings and premarital counseling and everything else, and my kids entering into the dating world and all that. Um, I've realized that, uh, man, the church has really messed up on sex, I think, a lot
Mm.
throughout the years. And the thing that I've realized is there's a reason why the Bible begins and ends with a wedding. So it begins with, even before, before sin, before any other real covenant that we see in Scripture, which covenant is a lot throughout the Old Testament. God creates man. Says the first time he says it's not good, he says it's not good that man should be alone. That's not saying that everybody should be married. That's saying that we were created for community. And then he creates Eve, and there's this marriage, this covenant where the two are joined together into one flesh, and they leave their father and mother, and are joined together. And it's this first picture of a covenant. And it was the part of God's creation that he created to best reflect his love for us. So then all throughout Scripture, we see the church referred to as the bride of Christ.
Mm.
And all throughout the Old Testament, we see God's covenant with Israel. And that covenant language is all like the two will become one. It's this joining together, relational, um, and and we see that first picture when Adam and Eve are joined together, the two will become one flesh. And of course, Jesus riffs on it later on when he says, "And what God's joined together, let no one separate." And then when we see the end, the close of Scripture, um, we see this marriage supper at the end of Revelation, and then we see this really big, like bejeweled golden cube city coming down, and it's this weird, like, wait, it's really as tall as it is wide, as it is long, and it's all these jewels that we don't even know what they mean anymore, and what is going on? And then it says very specifically, no, this is the bride of Christ. This is the church, and Jesus being together with his bride, with the church, and it's this amazing picture of this wedding feast to close all of Scripture and to begin all of eternity of God being with his people, and that marriage symbolism is used to describe this relationship between God and his people isn't accidental, and is incredibly beautiful and poetic. And oh, by the way, if you look a couple chapters before that marriage supper in Revelation, when it talks about the evil forces coming, how are they described? Babylon is described as a whore. And so even like the language there is like anti-marriage covenant, and it's pretty incredible stuff when you combine that with all that Scripture says about marriage, and then you get into the law and all of the sexual laws, and the two becoming one flesh is very much a sexual picture, but it's significantly more than a sexual picture.
Yeah.
And then the way that it's talked about just all throughout Scripture, I think it's such a beautiful walking, talking parable of God's love for his church, that for the church to then mess that up, and for the church to get in line with culture about sex outside of marriage is really damaging, both to marriage and to our theology of God's love for his people. And so I think the church, as it's sort of made sex taboo, when we were growing up, I guess we were still this side of the original sexual revolution, but on the other side of a lot of the current sexual revolution stuff, it was still like the church was kind of seen as a prude, and sex is bad and whatever. Whereas I would say sex is one of the greatest things that God created, and we need to hold it up as such. And if we do hold it up as such, then we will be honoring the institution that God created, even more so. It's like I think it was, I'm going to misquote. I think probably C.S. Lewis is misquoted more than anyone else in history. But he talked about. There's one time I was reading. He talked about it's not the glutton who loves food. It's not the drunkard who loves wine, but it's those who know how to enjoy it properly. And so I think it's the same thing with the church in sex, where it's not the pornographer that loves sex. It's not the sex positive single. I guess that's the term people use these days. That loves sex. I think it's the one that keeps it private and in the context that God created it, that are the only ones that can really enjoy it.
Yeah. Yeah. So curious your thoughts on this. I grew up a little bit younger than you. I grew up during when the True Love's Waits was like big.
Yeah.
Like I remember getting the purity ring, that sort of thing.
Uh-huh.
And then, I don't know, 5-10 years ago, a lot of people that had kind of grew up in my context, I'm about 35, started posting online about the damages of purity culture, whatever. And I used to be like, there is some sex is bad until you get married and it's good. Like I get that. But then I was like, but I think a lot of these people are like, eventually, and a lot of them did, at least that I was following online, it wasn't that they didn't like purity culture. What they really didn't like was sex outside of marriage as being bad. And so
Hmm.
it's kind of, they're like, it wasn't just how they talked about it. It's like, no, I was like, just be honest. Like, you don't think sex is wrong in any case, as
Yeah.
long as you have quote unquote two consenting adults. How do you approach the whole, I mean, I don't know. What's your wisdom on the balance between, yeah, I mean, you should refrain from it unless you've covenanted with a member of the opposite sex in marriage,
Yeah.
but it's also not a bad, dirty, disgusting thing. Yeah. What's the, I don't know,
Yeah.
what's the line there?
Yeah. There's an interesting, Tony Campolo in one of his books one time he was working at a college and he said, it became a pretty regular occurrence. Like someone would come into my office, a college kid, and would say, I'm really having a hard time believing that God's word is true. And he said, my first question to this young man was, so how long have you been sleeping with your girlfriend? And he was making the point of this cognitive dissonance, which is, here's what I want to do.
Right.
And if I do that, here's what then I have to believe. And if I have to believe this to do this, then this whole thing has to crumble. And so there's a desire to throw kind of the baby out with the bathwater, where this is what we want to do. We want to be sexually free. And don't get me wrong, I get it. I
Yeah.
totally get it. There's a lot of sins of this world that I don't really get. That one I get. Um, and the reason why is because sex is such a beautiful, wonderful thing that God created. But the then taking that and trying to destroy, purity culture, um, man, that's a really dangerous thing. And it's really interesting that uh, that purity culture has become like a pejorative.
Yeah.
I think that's weird to
Yeah.
me. And I think it's concerning to me as well. And there's this whole freedom thing in, especially women, do what you want, dress how you like, all this stuff. And it's the man's job uh, to
Mm.
deal with their own actions the way that they need to. And man, there's some real biological stuff there that you're really working against. That's I don't think
Well,
that's going to
so,
go
I
that
mean,
well.
you said it. Let's just talk about that for a minute, maybe our closing time here.
Okay, I don't have any
There's
daughters, by
the,
the way. Do we already say this? I
yeah,
don't have any daughters.
there is the responsibility as men to look on, do what is pure, righteous, holy, have integrity, look away, do the right thing.
Hmm.
But I see that a lot too. It's like, I can wear, essentially, I don't think the average like Christian woman says this, but people online will say this: I can wear whatever I want, and as a woman, and men should just know better. I mean, Jesus said, "Cut off your hand,
Yeah,
pluck out your eye," and
yeah,
it's, yeah. So what's the balance there between, yeah, there's a responsibility of men, but also like how we dress and how men dress too. I mean, it's increasingly social media world. I mean, men do the same thing for likes, but like, yeah, how do you approach that? Like, it does matter what you wear, and it also is man's responsibility to do the right thing.
yeah. I mean, it's a both and. Again, I don't have daughters. I have four sons, so I've never had to deal with this like at the mall with a 14-year-old. Um, so full disclosure. Uh, but it's this, it's real similar with the cell phone conversation, where I think a lot of parents need to be the parent,
Mm.
um, and and do what you know is right, and your kid will probably thank you later. They might not, um, but I know how a dude's brain works. I've shared a lot of locker rooms with a lot of dudes,
Mm.
uh, and I know. I mean, there's a reason why Madison Avenue uses sex to sell, because it's going to grab your attention. They know that if you show this scene, if you show this whatever, it's going to grab your attention, and especially guys, it's going to grab their attention. And now that we have your attention, let me sell you a product. Um, and so I mean, I think there needs to be a real conversation with women, uh, that and it's weird that guys can't have this conversation
Mm.
with women. But let me just tell you, uh, I am a 47-year-old, very happily married man. Uh, but also I can tell you what certain things will biologically do to me, and I don't I don't want you to do that.
Hmm.
You don't if you really knew how
Yeah.
guys think, I don't think you would. I think you would think differently about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I agree. I do think that's what's tough. I was like, obviously we're two guys, so I mean, obviously I get that, but I'm like, if women could be a guy for a day, I do think there would be some more like, because
yeah,
this, I mean, and not to say, obviously, like women are attracted to men sexually, men are attracted to women sexually, but we are different. Our brains work
it's
different,
different.
physiologically we are different. I'm not a woman, so I can't speak to that. I just think that yeah, a lot of women, if they knew what it was like for men to see when they do X,
Yeah,
Y, Z, I do think it's a lot more. I I don't know the word. It's a lot worse than you think it is. If you're a woman, it's a lot worse
it's a
than you
lot
think it
worse than
is.
you think it is. It's a lot worse
Yeah.
than you think it is. And if my wife, by the way, to be fair, if my wife was right here, her words would be a lot stronger than mine
Yeah.
on the topic. So this isn't like me being what do we call it, toxic masculine,
That's
whatever.
right.
Um, her words would be much more pointed and
Yeah.
direct than mine.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Well, Jared, I appreciate your time. Sabbath, slowness, rest is a big thing. Parenting, obviously, a big thing. Biblical view of sex. As we end, I don't know any closing words, any of those topics, anything else you want to share?
Um, yeah, I'm just gonna reiterate what I said earlier, which I think may be the tie that binds all of these things, um, which is love your spouses really well.
Hmm.
I think that's the key to parenting. I think that's the key to sexual fulfillment. I think that's the key to walking out this parable that God created to show His love for His bride. I think it's the key to contentment because a lot of the Sabbath rest slowness stuff is is chasing something
Hmm.
because we're not content with being still. A lot of the noise is because we're afraid of what we might hear in our own souls if we're silent, and a lot of the going and going and going is because I don't know how to sit down and have a conversation with my kids or my family. So I think loving your spouse as well, and uh, dudes giving your lives for your wives and loving them as Christ loved the church. Um, and I feel like that might be I told you when we talked about these earlier, I don't think there's any connection between any of these things that we talked about. Maybe that's the connection. Love your spouse as well, and uh, yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Well, Jared, thanks for the wisdom today. Thanks for being my favorite pastor in North Raleigh, and I
You're welcome
appreciate the time.
anytime to come to Vintage Church North, Dylan.
All right. Thanks, Jared.
Yeah.